No, I know. It is sad. We just, if we knew that there was over 800 military bases in our name carrying out
God
actions that,
knows what. We don't even know.
yeah, exactly, right. And I just found out that there's like 320 biolabs tied to the US Pentagon internationally outside of US borders, which are totally opaque. Everyone's talking about Wuhan, but I mean, 320 biolabs, some level 4
Right.
labs, no coverage, total opacity. We don't. All we know is that the PNAC crowd was talking back in 1999 in their publicized, or year 2000 September, when they published this thing under Donald Kagan, the brother of Robert Kagan,
Right.
and Paul Wolfowitz. They published the Rebuilding America's Defenses, and in it they literally say that a new priority on top of the Pearl Harbor thing has to be developing warfare in the genome domain that would involve weaponizing certain pathogens to be ethnically targeted, such that you could have a focus on certain genotypes of, let's say, an enemy civilization you want to annihilate that would do less damage to the friendly civilizations next door. Less, though, not no damage. And then they go and do things like the anthrax attacks, which turns out to be an inside job. Graham McQueen, a professor at the University of Toronto, proved that that's the case. He wrote many books, demonstrated that it was entirely done through a network of biolabs in Fort Detrick and a few others next to it that did anthrax, then blamed it on, again, Al-Qaeda, because they just did 9/11, we were told. Right. And then that justified Dick Cheney's BioShield Act. That then justified something like $50 billion of over the budget, but we don't know how much black budget capital into building up this giant array international that Obama was overseeing when he was seeding these things in Georgia, of which there's at least 48 biolabs working on Slavic genotypes and others. In Georgia, there were some in Ukraine, 48 or so in Ukraine that Victoria Nuland admitted to. There was something like, there's another array in South Korea that Obama also oversaw with the Jupiter Centaur program in 2010, 2011, which involved, and they proved this, there was protests in South Korea of smart South Korean citizens that we didn't get to see any of this, that were protesting on the streets outside of the US embassies because they were pissed that this biolab was sending weaponized anthrax by FedEx. It got caught. They got caught doing that. And of course, the Russians just above, the Chinese just below, the North Koreans just above, are all freaking out because they know the PNAC groupings have been pouring billions of dollars into ethnically targeted pathogens. Wow. I'm not even saying virus because I don't even know what the hell that is anymore, but there's definitely pathogens that can be genetically modified in a variety of ways that could induce certain types of symptoms that can be deadly. That I believe. I'm not getting to the whole terrain versus germ thing, but I knew that that's a thing that they've been doing since the Korean War and onward. It's a thing, as much as people might not like to hear that. And I think that's another aspect of the cyber, because in the PNAC document they talk about germ warfare, cyber warfare, and space-based warfare is the war domains of the 21st century. Right. We know that looking at cyber polygon is something that they could easily do. I think they've been preparing the groundwork for that as a possibility of doing something to the internet and again, blaming it on China or Russia or some combo. Space-based weaponry. Putin made an announcement just a couple of weeks ago saying that, look, they have to redo their nuclear response doctrine in Russia, because if they're attacked by space-based weaponry, which they know has been developed in secret, then that would justify a nuclear retaliation by Russia, even if it's not a nuclear attack onto Russia. If it's a space-based weapon, they're saying as a way to try to shake some sense into the West, that will result in a lot more pain than you're going to inflict on us. So don't do that. But so already you got this whole asymmetrical warfare, and I'm not even talking about the war on the mind, which has been ongoing since Exactly. Yeah, it's not about the money. You're totally correct. It's not about the money. And a lot of people, I thought for years it was about the money, and then it's like, but then you have to account for all sorts of things that can't be reducible to monetary incentive. Right. And it's true, if you put yourself in the shoes of a transgenerational oligarch born into several castles that you inherited, and you're part of you're born into a status of what seems to be privilege. You're already an inner member of a bunch of clubs just by being born. Exactly. But at the same time, you're also going to be abused. You're going to be ritually assaulted as far as the grooming of your
Yeah.
broken of your humanity as you're expected to become one of the heirs that will carry on the family legacy and the broader empire that's associated with. So that's very unnatural. But it's not money that motivates you. If you have a bunch of castles and you control the levers of global monetary money creation, it's not going to be, you don't wake up needing more millions or billions or trillions. It's not it. You're willing to probably lose most of that money if it's going to increase your influence and power. So I think what it comes down to is like the ability for these people to actualize their belief that they are gods. I think there's a philosophy that, like within these occult secret societies, that is sort of the religion of the oligarchy, because everybody needs to have some form of faith philosophically to animate their deeper being. Otherwise, you can't just you can float around as a nihilist without believing in purpose, but you're not going to do much in general. You'll maybe eke by moment to moment.
Right.
But the thing that's going to give you the passion to like create transgenerational conspiracies, that also can't be done by some nihilistic atheism. You have to have some positive conviction in some cosmology or theology that animates your heart and mind. And they got their own thing that they've weaved for themselves as a religion.
Yep.
And it's very black magic occult that they believe in.
Yep.
And they believe that at the end of the day, by going through these degrees of initiation, these ceremonies that have been going on since the days of ancient Babylon and the mass murder campaigns of the human sacrifices of the mystery cults back then, which continued under different forms, but always the same thing for the next 2,500 or whatever, 3, 4, 5,000 years.
Right.
They will become liberated of, they believe, the entrapment of conscience, of naive beliefs in faith and God and things like that. They can break themselves of free to be true, actualized, liberated people who realize that they actually are the God. They are a God. And you got to do some bad things along the way it's so unnatural to merge opposites inside of yourself, infuse the holy into the unholy, try to do things that are seemingly beautiful and ugly at the same time to destroy all difference in some weird Jungian sort of convergence of opposites. And then all of a sudden you're going to somehow have what they're doing is they're creating schizophrenic, like they've systematized creating schizophrenic breaks within themselves. Yeah. And that type of multiple personality complex that they themselves have groomed into themselves as a messed up culture, they've created diffused forms of that for their social engineering for the masses along the way as well, because we all have a little trace of that oligarchism that's been awoken within us if we're going to be self-enslaving within their structures. So that's part of what I'm seeing, is that the oligarchy has this kind of it's a religion, but it's tied to a murder death cult that believes that God is evil. Ultimately, nothingness created everything, that everything is striving to become nothingness, that outside of the everything that we see in the universe that appears to have beauty and goodness, and flowers appear to be beautiful. And a naive person, says one of these messed up thinkers, a naive, simple-minded person might think that a flower indicates that creation is good and beautiful. Mm-hmm. The true wise person knows that that's all just a lie. It's a lie. And that the reality is ugliness and nothingness. And that by being conduits or instruments to accelerate our return to nothingness, we're going to achieve our destiny. And so in that sense, I think that the oligarchy is a perversion of reality. They are not an expression of secret knowledge that they have for the inner elites. It's not real knowledge that they're holding on to. And the same desire to not be that animates them religiously is the thing that they've tried to put into all of us by getting us to accept that Darwinianism, or let's say the second law of thermodynamics, are somehow universal laws that both indicate that nature is wired to like destroy the weak and have the strong survive. Right. But it's like, if that were true, then you would think that nature would just homogenize and get less complex over time as the strong ate up the weak and destroyed the weak for the sake of some sex drive and food drive. But the opposite happens. We find that things get actually the opposite from very low level, in the fossil records, there's low level single celled activity, a long time ago. And as time moves forward, we have ever more increasing complexity, systems that come into being that are created with a design and a purpose that can express higher emotions that bugs can't do. Right. lizards can showcase or express emotions that bugs can't, and mammals can express emotions, more refined divine emotions like affection for their young that lizards don't seem to exhibit. And then humans, seem to be able to self-reflect on all of that and tap into the love of the species that animals don't have great grandpa lions that they think about and tell stories to their grandkid lions. They just don't do that. They're fine for what they are, but humans can actually do that. So I think the oligarchy is the opposite of all of those things. And they despise that beautiful quality of humanity that makes us great. They want to annihilate that and keep us in a, like you said, the Club of Rome, right? And I think their arrogance will be their downfall at the end of the day. The fact that because that's part of the consequence. If you believe that you are God, you start acting with total arrogance and you stop self-criticizing, which in some sense is a good thing for humans who want to look for weak chinks in the armor of this oligarchy. Where the weak spots in the Goliath, it's really that they believe their own propaganda.
Right.
It's like they do their own drugs, and they forget that the propaganda was designed to make their victims stupid and more obedient, and instead they start themselves consuming it.
Right.
So that all of a sudden makes them misstep.
Right.
They start they put out too much of what they want to do openly, and I think that that's something which, if you have competent leadership and people who know how to utilize their minds properly, they can definitely use that and wield that information properly in order to see, well, what do they not want, but also not falling in for traps. Because one of the things that the oligarchy does, they kind of toy with us too. So one thing that they'll do when they want to create a controlled opposition is that they'll get like Klaus Schwab to go out and say, anybody who wants to really threaten the New World Order and Great Reset will adopt libertarianism. That's the enemy of that's the only thing we're afraid of is libertarianism. And it's like, you think we don't know you want a bunch of people to go and embrace libertarianism? Like, do you think that that's not obvious? Like you're basically demanding, and then Yuval Harari goes and says something almost identical. So clearly they're trying to create this controlled opposition, which manifests in the form of what we see with Javier Milei, where they're like, oh yeah, he said all the right things against the Great Reset. He said the right things against communism and all these things that are against wokeism. It appealed to me morally as a Christian conservative. Which is where people get dumb, because they stop looking at, well, what did he actually do? Because the first thing the guy does is he massively privatizes every bloody thing. He slashes the budget and social safety nets and stuff like that. But he does what Pinochet basically did back in the 70s when Kissinger and Schultz put Pinochet in power, which is you open up to the free markets, you shut down all government regulation, government protection, any type of approach to national banking, you shut it all down. And then you will basically allow foreign multinational cartels to get control of your government.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, but you did it for freedom. And it's like, well, that didn't work for Pinochet. It's not working for Argentina. Their currency is still collapsing in self-induced annihilation. And so, it's a trap. And it's a trap because even if you go back down to the 1933, when this thing was being set up at the London School of Economics, the Fabian Society School,
of course.
That was set up. That was the venue that John Maynard Keynes, with his buddy Friedrich von Hayek, they were lifelong friends. They were set up to do a highly publicized debate between the two schools of thought that people were expected to adopt, one of the two acceptable modes of thought in response to the Great Depression. And on the one hand, you had the top-down Keynesian view of just state, getting in control of private assets, kind of pseudo-communistic-y, paying money to give people random work, and in the Keynesian world, it didn't matter if you paid somebody a paycheck from the government to dig a hole and paid somebody else to fill up the hole. It didn't matter because they're both getting paychecks and they're both going to use it to go to the grocery store to buy stuff. And the act of buying stuff will create a demand for industries to produce the soap or whatever, the cereal. And then the industries that are making this stuff are going to have a demand on the state to build infrastructure to have the electricity and the water systems to support the industrial production or the agriculture. And thus the state will do the things to sustain that dude who got paid the paycheck to fill up the hole that was just dug by the other guy. Right. And the Keynesian system is really that stupid. But then they're like, that's one choice you have, top down, or the other one is the state does nothing. The nation state should stop existing and having any influence, privatize everything, cut the budget and austerity, and then somehow you're going to have an economic miracle. And both sides were promoted to destroy what the US was actually doing by the revival of the Abraham Lincoln greenback economic architecture and the whole war on Wall Street that was happening with the constitutional banking procedures that were being done by people from both sides of the aisle who understood how Warren Harding had just been murdered in 1924, how William McKinley had just been murdered before that in 1901, and Garfield and Lincoln before that. And you had more Americans from both sides who were able to work together to deal with this, foreign parasite that was out to destroy 1776. They rallied around FDR, who did a full-on assault to stop the one world government agenda in 1933, which he did by pulling out the U.S. delegations from the London Banking and Monetary Conference that was supposed to be a one world government under John Maynard Keynes's oversight, and the Bank of England and the League of Nations. He destroyed it. And then he broke up the Wall Street banks. He brought thousands of bankers into court. Hundreds went to jail. Total reorganization with Glass-Steagall. Like, there was a fight. People died, people actually died. And we don't know their story because the agents that were funding the Wall Street bankers that were funding fascism, that created the Great Depression, that were the ones who ended up not getting punished after World War II, were the ones who ended up writing our new history books to reframe what that whole thing was all about. And we forgot that Keynes, which represents the more Great Reset Klaus Schwabian liberal fascism, was infiltrated into the the Democratic Party, especially over the dead body of JFK, who was not a Keynesian. Neither was FDR. We've been lied to. They were not. FDR hated Keynes and said he was an incompetent idiot. And John Maynard Keynes thought that FDR was an incompetent idiot and said so as well. And that's been transcribed, their remarks about each other, by FDR's personal secretary.
Right.
So that was infused into the Democratic Party and the Austrian school, which were the court bankers or the court economists of the Habsburg Empire. They basically, that's why it's called the Austrian school. It's the Austrian Habsburg Empire that created their own brand of Adam Smithian British economics into their Austrian architecture. That's what von Hayek came out of, even when he was working for the government of the first fascist government of Austria in 1919. He was advising with Ludwig von Mises, the fascist government of austerity in Austria in 1919. And they basically, their agency created things like the Mont Pelerin Society in 1946, which came out of the School for the Renovation of Liberalism that von Hayek created with a bunch of Fabian socialists like Walter Lippmann, who were both part of the same London-based operation that created the Mont Pelerin Society, that then infiltrated the Republican Party in America. And they were doing the same thing for the Conservatives of Canada. So they basically, like viruses taking over hosts.
Right.
That's what they did. And then throughout the Cold War, people got so crazy that they thought to be a good Democrat means you got to be a good British Keynesian. And to be a good Republican, you got to be a good Austrian school, privatize it all. And they created the false dichotomy. And the actual people who were, and here we are, naturally, here we are now. Yeah, because it's like an elegant, beautiful story, and it's full of classical tragedy and beauty, and it's like,
and perseverance and hope, and people against all odds. I mean, our whole, and you lay out a lot of that, especially during those FDR years and post World War II. But what they've done to our country, they gutted it. I think they're past the controlled demolition. They're in the liquidation phase of America, and most Americans have no idea that it's happening.
No, they don't. I mean, I think there's this battle of the mind, right? And part of what they've done is to get people's way. They've created and encouraged a way of thinking that is incompetent and overly simplistic and based upon the idea that truth comes from just getting simple answers at the back of the textbook or given to us by experts that we can like get a consensus of expert opinion on an encyclopedia search or Wikipedia or whatever authority we choose to give our trust to. And it's like, no, truth, if you're going to have a conviction based upon something that is a deeply seated belief about something, you better have earned it. Like, you don't want to get a paycheck without earning the paycheck. You got to earn the paycheck, and the conviction, the opinion should be the consequence of having done arduous mental labor that is very self-reflective, self-examining of your own assumptions that were perhaps deeply held beliefs, but that you didn't examine how you got them, because some of them might have been earned, some of them were just slipped in under your radar that you didn't think too deeply about, but it became a conviction and it shouldn't have so quickly.
Right.
So I think when you look at this quality of thinking, and then you read the writings, like I like original writings of people. So, but it's like you read the writings, and they're all of these people who are shaping history for the good and creating conspiracies for the good are all drawing from the same well, utilizing a very similar method of self-examination of the heart and the mind that involves a constant internal dialectic with themselves and the universe at the same time, that changes how they see themselves within a process contextually. They're always thinking about the context that their finite life is located within, and making their creative decisions. All of their creative juices flow from that identity that understands that there's a higher meaning to life than simply what you can get out of the period of your birth and death. They're all doing that. They all draw, and you read Martin Luther King's transcripts and you listen to the passion in his.
Oh my God, I know.
It's
I
like,
love it.
Okay, yeah, great. And that was very well said. I couldn't agree more. So my Substack is something that I maintain and curate every day. There's a new thing that comes out, mostly free. Sometimes there's something behind a paywall, but that's it right there. There's a picture of it.
There it is.
Yeah.
The best Substack you can read. You'll learn more than you can imagine. I tell you that much for sure.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to clip that little statement out and make that the thing that everybody hears when they go to the Substack. Mel K says.
It's true.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and we do want to expand the curriculum process for homeschoolers massively. So we're actually in discussion right now to create something called the International Dialogue Forum, or the name is still up and running, but it's going to be more of an academy focus.
Oh, great.
It's going to be tied to the Rise and Tide Foundation, and we're going to focus on curriculum, history a lot, and science. So yeah, if people want to get that stuff, riseandtidefoundation.net has a lot of good stuff. We do weekly meetings as well, and seminars with experts that people could sign up for and register for. Just send us a message by the email, by the website. And the last thing is our books. Like you said, we just got a shipment of all of our books, hard copies. So if people do want a signed copy, just send us an email at info@risingtidefoundation.net, and I'll tell you how that works. So that's it. That's pretty much it. Mel, it's a blessing to know you too, and I love our collaboration. It's great. And yeah, I am looking forward to getting back. Those are fun, and we should do it. Yeah, let's do it again. The weekly or biweekly, more lecture format to get
love that.
into the next level of knowledge. I think that would be good too. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, we're living in history. We're all participating in history. Whatever happens, like you said, happens. There's things we can't control, but we can control how we respond to the situation. Right. In terms of our own spiritual relationship to God, to our fellow humankind, and we got to know that no matter what, we always have to look inward to always ask ourselves, am I doing the best that I could possibly do, or could I do better? And as long as like that's your self-reference point, you will do better. You're going to be able to clean up messiness in your feelings and your thoughts that are withholding your higher potentials from being expressed. Yeah. Right. And you know that you need to, because God created you to be the best that you could possibly be. So whatever happens to, as far as dirty games, inside jobs, there's all sorts of things that could cause people who are lesser developed to go into depression and sadness. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but you got to be sure that what's driving that fire inside of you is not being determined by the material successes outside of you. That being said, we are entering a period of high potential for the good as well because of the instability of the system. And we could see some wonderful transformations happening in a quicker way than people realize if we're acting as the best that we could possibly be at the same time. And not be tragic, not be less than what we could be. So I think that, the elections are coming up. That's going to be a big fight. Whatever happens during and after the elections it's one of many battles. And we did a lot of, I'll just end it with this. We succumbed to many generations of decay, and that doesn't heal that quick. That's going to take time to slowly heal the tissue that we spiritually allowed ourselves to decay around. So that is something that if we get Trump is a human being who is not a technocrat. He's generally inclined to be organized towards solutions. Right. So despite all of and people might read my stuff and notice that I map out a lot of bad people around him. That's part of life. There's always going to be bad people. The question is, can you amplify the good? And so coming into this, the world is going to a very good place. That I haven't seen something as far as this type of coalition of different civilizational forces that represent ancient civilizations that have shaken off to varying degrees, some very good degrees, the death cult takeover of those societies, and that don't want to die and that want to rather work with us in some form of harmony that is not within the confines of the feudal system of death that the oligarchy wants. So that's good. A lot to work with, a lot of potential, and I'll leave it with that. We got to just do our part.